Her name is Ifeoma. She is 30 years old and she sells cosmetics and skincare products from a small shop in Owerri, Imo State. She imports most of her stock from China through a clearing agent in Lagos. Since 2023, her import costs have more than doubled, not because she buys more, but because the naira buys far less than it used to. Ifeoma does not follow politics in detail. She does not belong to any political party. She has never attended a rally. She voted in 2023, Labour Party, because her cousin in Abuja told her the party's candidate was the one most likely to fix the economy. She queued for 2 hours, she voted, she went back to work. In 2026, two different groups have knocked on her door. One was a group of young men in APC t-shirts who came to register her for the party. She was polite, she did not register. The second was a young woman from a NDC voter mobilization group who left her a card and asked her to attend a community meeting. She went to the meeting, asked a few questions, and went home. Ifeoma has not committed to anything. She has not joined any party, she is not in any political WhatsApp group. She is, in every conventional political category, unaffiliated. And she is the most valuable voter in Nigeria's 2027 election. What is happening to Ifeoma is really about the most important and least discussed political question in the entire 2027 cycle. Every campaign, every governor machine, every diaspora fundraising group, every party secretariat in Nigeria is in different ways and through different methods chasing the same specific voter, the uncommitted, economically exposed, practically motivated, non-partisan Nigerian who will decide this election at the margin. They are the swing voter that nobody talks about by name, and the candidates who most effectively reaches them will win 2027. Before we go deeper, if you are just finding NaijaNewsWatch, welcome. This channel exists to break down what is really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise and without the spin. If that is the kind of analysis you enjoy, hit subscribe and stay with me because this story is about to get a lot more interesting. Let us set the foundation, because to understand who the contested voter actually is, you need to understand the specific demographic and motivational landscape of the Nigerian electorate in 2026. According to the Vanguard political analysis of the 2027 race, the emerging contest is gradually taking the shape of a larger political struggle between structure and emotion, incumbency and coalition politics, elite power and grassroots anger. That framing, structure versus emotion, is the most useful lens for understanding who the contested voter is. The structure voter is someone whose presidential voting behavior is shaped primarily by patronage networks, party machinery, community pressure, or traditional authority guidance. They vote as their governor's machine directs, or as their LGA chairman recommends, or as their community's traditional ruler signals. These voters exist across all regions and all parties. They are the base that structural political investment secures. The emotion voter is someone whose presidential voting behavior is shaped primarily by a specific personal reaction to a candidate, what the candidate represents, how the candidate makes them feel, what the candidate's presence on the ballot means for their identity or their aspirations. The obedience movement in 2023 was primarily emotion voters, people who responded to Obi's candidacy with an intensity that governor machinery and party loyalties could not fully suppress. But between these two types sits a third type, the type that Ifeoma in Owerri represents, the practical voter, the person who votes based not on party loyalty, not on emotional identification with a candidate, but on a specific, rational assessment of which candidate's governance approach is most likely to improve the specific economic conditions they are living with. These voters are harder to mobilize than emotion voters and less predictable than structure voters, and they are the margin that decides competitive elections. According to the Vanguard political analysis, the unfolding contest is a clash between incumbency and coalition politics, elite influence and grassroots anger. The practical voter is the one who is evaluating all of these simultaneously, who is doing the kind of practical calculation that Ifeoma does in her shop when she checks her import costs and thinks which candidate's economic governance would have prevented this. Now, let us look at the institutional rules, because the contested voter exists within a specific electoral framework that shapes how they can be reached and how their votes can be protected. The constitutional spread requirement, 25% of valid votes in at least 24 states, is the most important rule for understanding the contested voter's significance. The practical voter is not uniformly distributed across Nigeria. They are concentrated in specific categories and specific geographies: urban commercial centers, semi-urban market towns, newly registered young voters who have not yet developed partisan habits, and returning voters who voted for a candidate that came third in 2023 and are now recalibrating. According to INEC's voter registration data, Nigeria has a young, rapidly growing electorate with significant first-time voter registration in each cycle. The 18 to 25 age group, young Nigerians who were not old enough to vote in 2019 but are eligible in 2027, represents millions of voters who have not yet developed any party affiliation pattern. They are, by definition, contested. The BVAS accreditation technology and the IReV results transmission system are the institutional protections that matter most for the contested voter, specifically because the contested voter, unlike the structure voter, is not mobilized through a governor's machine that provides collation-level protection. The practical voter turns up at the polling unit based on personal motivation. Whether their vote survives from the polling unit to the final declared result depends on whether the technological safeguards of the electoral system are functioning. For the contested voter, a functioning IReV is the equivalent of what a party agent network provides for the structure voter. Now, let us go deep, because the contested voter is not an abstraction. They are specific, identifiable, geographically concentrated categories whose behavior will determine the 2027 result at the margin. Let us name 5 specific contested voter categories that every 2027 campaign is, whether explicitly or implicitly, chasing. Category 1. The disillusioned APC economic pragmatist. This is Adekunle from our earlier video, the Lagos printing business owner who voted APC in 2023 because he calculated that Tinubu's Lagos record meant economic competence and has spent 3 years watching his cost base triple while 3 employees went home. According to political analysis, Tinubu still retains influence among governors, lawmakers, and traditional political networks, but he has lost meaningful support among urban business professionals who voted for him on economic governance grounds. This category is the most politically articulate contested voter. They understand what they voted for, they know what they got, and they are making an explicit recalculation. According to reporting, APC elected representatives have moved to the NDC as some among this category reposition. These voters are concentrated in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Idamet. They are accessible through podcast audiences, business associations, and professional networks. Category 2. The first-time 2023 voter who is now recalibrating. This is Ife Omainoweri, the 2023 Labour Party voter who made their first-ever presidential ballot based on the obedient movement emotional energy. They voted on emotion, they are now evaluating on results. Their 2027 recalibration will be shaped by whether the emotional energy that Labour Party generated is available on the NDC platform, whether Obi's NDC candidacy triggers the same level of personal identification that his Labour Party 2023 candidacy did, and whether the platform switch from LP to NDC feels like continuity or disruption. Category 3. The Northern Preference Voter. This is Aliyu from our earlier video, the Ibrahim Kebbi teacher who voted for Buhari in 2015 for character, voted for Atiku in 2023 with tired loyalty, and is in 2026 asking himself which candidate most credibly embodies the specific qualities he values. This voter does not follow party labels primarily. They follow a character assessment. They were the most consistent Buhari voter from 2011 to 2019. Without Buhari on the ballot, they are genuinely available for any candidate who credibly projects the integrity standard they associated with him. This category is spread across the Northwest core states and is the most consequential specific voter pool that no current candidate has definitively won. The Middle Belt security grievance voter is David from our Middle Belt script, the Benue farmer who can't reach his land. This voter is motivated not by economic calculation or candidate identity, but by the most fundamental political question: which candidate will make my community safe? According to the documentation we covered, over 6,800 people have died in Benue State since 2023. This community's voting behavior is driven by security assessment in a way that is independent of party labels, governor alignment, or ethnic loyalty. The candidate who makes the most credible, specific commitments to Middle Belt security governance will win a disproportionate share of this vote. Currently, no candidate has made that commitment in community visit-backed, policy-specific terms. And finally, the returning non-voter. This is the category that is hardest to identify in the data, but potentially most consequential in the result. According to political analysis, voter apathy and growing disenchantment with the political process are documented phenomena in the Nigerian electorate. There are millions of registered voters who participated in previous cycles and then stopped because their candidate lost, because the results seemed managed, because the government they elected did not deliver, or because the experience of queuing in the heat for a result that was later disputed felt not worth repeating. The returning non-voter who re-engages in 2027 can be motivated either by negative emotion, anger at the incumbents sufficient to overcome apathy, or positive identification with a candidate who feels sufficiently different from the system they withdrew from.
Here is the pattern interrupt that changes everything about how you should read the 2027 campaign strategies. According to the Vanguard analysis, governors are intensifying private consultations and public endorsements, former ministers are reviving political alliances, financiers are reactivating dormant networks, while regional blocs and youth movements are recalibrating strategies. All of that activity, the governor consultations, the minister alliances, the regional blocs, is aimed primarily at the structure voter. The contested voter categories we have just named are not reached through governor consultations, they are reached through different channels entirely. The disillusioned APC economic pragmatist is reached through economic policy specificity, detailed, credible, technically grounded arguments about exchange rate management, import cost reduction, and business regulatory reform. The first-time 2023 voter who is recalibrating is reached through platform continuity communication, ensuring they know that the NDC ballot paper in 2027 is the Labour Party ballot paper in 2023, that the candidate is the same person they chose, that the movement has a new name but the same direction. The Northern Preference voter is reached through personal character demonstration, campaign behavior that shows simplicity, accessibility, and the willingness to be present in ordinary communities without the full apparatus of governor hospitality. The Middle Belt Security Grievance voter is reached through community-specific policy commitments, visiting Guma in Benue, visiting the plateau farming communities, and speaking in the language of structural governance reform rather than reactive military deployment. And the returning non-voter is reached through the only thing that has ever reliably re-engaged withdrawn voters, a candidate who makes them feel that this time is genuinely different. The silent players who determine which campaign most effectively reaches these contested voters are not the party chiefs or the governors. They are the community organizers, the ward-level obedient volunteers who know which neighbors voted in 2023 and which ones have stopped voting, the NLC shop steward who tells the factory floor what the Labour-aligned candidate represents, the ACAN chapter secretary in Plateau who communicates what the security situation means for 2027 voting behavior, the podcast host whose audience is overwhelmingly the Lagos economic pragmatist demographic. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Let us come back to Ifeoma in her cosmetics shop in Owerri. She is the most valuable voter in Nigeria's 2027 election, and two different campaign groups have already found her door. The APC group came with t-shirts and party registration forms. Ifeoma was polite. She did not register, not because she's anti-APC, but because the offer was a party card, not an answer to her import cost problem. The NDC group came with a meeting invitation. She went to the meeting. She asked questions. She went home. Not because she's committed to NDC, but because the meeting at least addressed her economic situation. It did not fully satisfy her, but it created a contact point. What Ifeoma needs, and what no campaign has yet fully provided, is a specific, credible, and practically grounded answer to one question. If you win, what specifically happens to my import costs? Not in general economic theory, not in macroeconomic data, in her shop, for her specific business, in practical terms she can assess against her own ledger. For the broader category of practical voters across Nigeria, the Ifeomas in Owerri, the small traders in Kano, the market women in Port Harcourt, the mechanics in Boko, the 2027 election is a practical governance assessment, not an ideological one. They are not asking which party is right or which candidate is more patriotic. They are asking whose economic governance will make my daily reality more manageable than it is right now. The candidate who most credibly and specifically answers that question will win Ifeoma's vote, and Ifeoma, multiplied across millions of Nigerian market stalls and small businesses and first-time voter households, is the margin that determines the result. The international dimension of the contested voter story is real and connects to how Nigeria's 2027 election is assessed globally. The Nigeria diaspora, more than $20 billion in annual remittances, has a specific relationship with the contested voter categories we have identified. The families who receive those remittances are disproportionately in the urban commercial centers, where the disillusioned APC economic pragmatist and the first-time 2023 voter are concentrated: Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Owerri. These are the cities that host both significant diaspora remittance recipients and significant concentrations of contested voters. When a Nigerian diasporan in London or Houston calls their family in Lagos and discusses the 2027 election, they are directly engaged in the contested voter communication that every campaign is trying to reach through more expensive, less personal mechanisms. The diaspora's informal political communication, through family calls, through WhatsApp family groups, through social media networks that stretch between host countries and home communities, is one of the most effective channels for reaching the practical voter that any campaign has available. Whether the diaspora is organized and directed towards specific contested voter communication, or whether it remains fragmented and informal, will shape how effectively the preference-based political energy of the diaspora translates into domestic voting behavior. Let me address what people on each side are getting wrong about the contested voter. The first misconception from structural political strategists is that the contested voter is ultimately deliverable through the right governor alignment and the right patronage network. This fundamentally misunderstands what makes the contested voter contested. The disillusioned APC economic pragmatist is not going to be won back by a governor's endorsement. The governor's endorsement is part of the system they are reassessing. The northern preference voter is not going to be won by a traditional ruler rally. They voted against the structure in 2023 when the structure was pointing at Atiku, and they voted for Buhari's memory instead. The contested voter, by definition, is the voter the structure has not locked. Throwing more structure at them does not reach them. The second misconception from preference vote optimists is that the contested voter is automatically available for any credible opposition candidate simply because they exist and are dissatisfied. Dissatisfaction is a necessary condition for contestability. It is not a sufficient condition for conversion. Ifeoma's NDC meeting contact is a beginning, not a conclusion. Converting the contested voter's dissatisfaction into a counted ballot requires the same three elements it always requires: a candidate they are willing to vote for, a platform they can find on the ballot paper, and a structural environment in which their vote is protected at collation level. The NDC has the first element for some contested voter categories. It is still building the second and third. The third misconception from everyone is that the contested voter can be won in the abstract rather than in the specific. The disillusioned APC economic pragmatist in Lagos needs to hear a specific Lagos-specific economic governance questions answer. The Middle Belt security grievance voter in Benue needs to see a candidate visit Guma, not a press statement. The Northern preference voter needs to watch a candidate's conduct in ordinary settings, not rally spectacles. The contested voter's political assessment is specific, grounded, and personal. Winning it requires the same specificity. Here is what to watch. 3 signals that will tell you which campaign is most effectively reaching the contested voter. First signal is whether any 2027 candidate launches a specific small business economic policy announcement in the second half of 2026. The disillusioned APC economic pragmatist, Ifeoma Inoweri, and millions like her, is the contested voter most accessible through policy specificity. A candidate who publishes a detailed, costed, practically grounded economic policy specifically addressing import costs, exchange rate stabilization, and small business regulatory reform, and communicates it through the media channels where this voter exists, business podcasts, Chamber of Commerce publications, professional association networks, is targeting this contested voter correctly. Watch for this specific type of policy communication in the second half of 2026. Second signal is whether the NDC makes formal voter communication explaining the platform transition from Labour Party to NDC. The first-time 2023 Labour Party voter who is recalibrating is specifically at risk of being lost through brand confusion, voting LP in 2023 and not recognizing or finding NDC in 2027. A formal, public NDC voter communication campaign specifically explaining that the same candidate is on a new platform, that the ballot paper will say NDC, and that the NDC continues the movement begun under LP in 2023 would signal that the campaign understands this specific contested voter and is taking practical steps to retain them. Third signal is whether any candidate makes a community-specific visit to a contested voter geography that is not their political base. A Tinubu visit to a Benue farming community affected by the farmer-herder violence, an Obi visit to a Kano market where northern preference voters make their decisions, a Atiku visit to a Lagos Small Business Association meeting. Any visit that takes a candidate into contested voter territory where they have no structural advantage, where they are not speaking to their base but to voters they need to persuade, is the most reliable signal of a campaign that understands what the contested voter requires. Best case scenario for democratic quality. the 2027 campaign season produces specific, contested voter-targeted policy communication from multiple candidates, forcing a genuine policy debate that is evaluated by practical voters on practical grounds. Ifeoma Inoweri goes to the polling unit in 2027 because she has heard a specific enough economic argument that she believes her vote will make a difference to her import costs. The contested voters' participation drives turnout, and the result reflects genuine voter preference rather than structural predetermination. Worst-case scenario, the 2027 campaign is dominated by governor endorsements, traditional ruler rallies, and party machinery activation, reaching the structure voter but leaving the contested voter unengaged. Ifeoma Inoweri watches the political noise, concludes that nobody is speaking to her specific situation, and decides that her 2-hour queue in 2023 produced no change in her import costs and no particular reason to repeat it. The contested voter abstains.
And the 2027 result is determined by whoever structure is most effectively deployed, rather than by the 40 million practical Nigerians whose assessment of what the government should do for their daily lives is the most legitimate mandate any democratic result can have. Let us go back to Ifeoma in her cosmetics shop in Owerri. She did not register with the APC party. She went to the NDC community meeting. She asked questions. She went home uncommitted. At the beginning of this video, I said she is the most valuable voter in Nigeria's 2027 election, and I want to close by explaining exactly why that is true. Ifeoma is not valuable to the campaigns because she is a swing voter in the abstract. She is valuable because she represents the clearest measure of whether Nigerian democracy is working in the way democracy is supposed to work. If Ifeoma votes in 2027, if she goes to the polling unit, finds her candidate on the ballot paper, casts her vote, and that vote is counted and protected, it is because some part of the democratic system has engaged her as a citizen, making a practical assessment of her government. That is democracy functioning. If Ifeoma stays home in 2027, because no candidate spoke to her specific situation, because the NDC ballot paper is too unfamiliar, because the queue feels long and the result feels predetermined, it is not simply a loss for one candidate. It is a signal that the practical, non-partisan Nigerian voter, who represents the most legitimate form of democratic participation, has concluded that the system is not for them. My measured conclusion: the contested voter, the 5 specific categories we identified across this video, is the voter that separates democratic governance from structural political management. The candidate who most specifically, most credibly, and most practically reaches these voters in their shops, their farms, their market stalls, their community meetings will not just win 2027, they will win it with the kind of mandate that changes how Nigerian government works. And the candidate who ignores these voters in favor of governor endorsement and party machinery will win or lose with a mandate that says nothing about what ordinary Nigerians actually wanted. The question I want to leave you with is this: if you are one of the voters we have described in this video, if you are Ifeoma Inoweri, or Adekule in Lagos, or Aliyu in Birni-Kebbi, or David in Guma, what specific thing would any 2027 candidate need to say or do to earn your vote? Drop your honest answer in the comments. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what is really going on, do me a favor, share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to NaijaNewsWatch, and I will see you in the next one. Stay sharp.